Today from the global lane, silence and society at a standstill. A coming cyber war may be closer than you think.
We're in a cyber cold war today. We've got vulnerabilities with air traffic, radar systems. We've got vulnerabilities in our 911 systems.
I think that every household can be more prepared for 30 days off the grid. Think about your water. Think about your food stock.
Censored and afraid to speak freely. Young Americans abandon the First Amendment.
We're creating a generation of speech phobics. These kids have been told their entire lives that free speech is harmful and it's triggering. You see, it's very hard to get a free people to give up freedom. They have to be really afraid or really angry. And that's what we're seeing.
Pressures mounting on Israel's Netanyahu to halt fighting with Hamas. But never again means never again. And it's all right here on the global lane. A war without guns, artillery, or missiles. Cyber attacks could bring America to a standstill. The Commission on National Defense Strategy recently warned senators that the United States is unprepared for a cyber war that could plunge the nation into chaos. Security experts are working feverishly to try to ensure that doesn't happen. CBN's Dale Hurd has that story.
This is the sound most people expect to hear in an attack on the American home front. But when war comes, we may only hear this. Silence, when many of the things we rely upon stop working. The Commission on the National Defense Strategy recently warned senators the United States is unprepared for a devastating cyber war that will bring life in towns and cities across America to a standstill.
The public is essentially clueless about the massive cyber attacks that could be launched any day by our adversaries, not just nation states, but rogue actors as well.
Experts see the next war beginning with a keyboard attack on America's critical infrastructure, threatening to cut off internet, electricity, water, transportation, and financial systems. It would mean almost everything from phones to gas pumps to cash machines to traffic lights suddenly stop working.
We're very vulnerable.
Cybersecurity expert Dr. Samantha Ravitch served on Congress's Cyberspace Solarium Commission and as a deputy national security advisor in the Bush White House. She's especially concerned about the lack of protection at America's many municipal water stations.
A soft underbelly of our country is our water system. And those water utilities don't often have the best cybersecurity. They have old technology.
After a cyber strike on your local water plant, your water tap might not work or your water could become dangerous to drink. In 2021, it was reported that a hacker tried to poison the water supply of Oldsmar, Florida, by increasing the levels of sodium hydroxide. The city now claims it was operator error, but in the last year, foreign actors from Iran and Russia have been linked to water facility attacks in Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Texas.
I've personally been inside over a dozen water and wastewater plants just in this region alone, and 100% of the water systems that I've been involved with have been extremely vulnerable to external attacks specifically.
Sean Waldman, CEO of Ohio-based Secure Cyber and a member of Cyber Ohio's Critical Infrastructure Working Group, says adversaries are constantly testing America's cyber defenses for vulnerabilities in preparation for war.
We're in a cyber cold war today. We've got vulnerabilities with air traffic, radar systems. We've got vulnerabilities in our 911 systems.
In China's Operation Volt Typhoon, hackers were able to pre-position bots inside U.S. systems, and they remained undetected for years, spying on the U.S. military. One of those responsible for securing America's power supply in the next cyber war is Andy Bachman, senior grid strategist at the Idaho National Lab. While his team works to make the grid safe, Bachman admitted there are a million vulnerabilities and a cyber war could be bad.
Yeah, if this came to pass in the United States and we lost critical infrastructure services that we take for granted, that we come to expect, there will be much wailing and gnashing of teeth. See the recent CrowdStrike thing. And that wasn't even a hack. That was just human error misconfiguration with a huge impact, right?
In a cyber war, hackers will not be content to just turn things off. They'll also try to force potentially dangerous sites like dams and nuclear plants to malfunction. In 2013, Iranian hackers gained access to the control system of a dam in Rye Brook, New York, before being caught. The experts we talked to all believe cyberwar is coming. All are personally preparing, some with stocks of food, water, and fuel.
I think that every household can be more prepared for 30 days off the grid. Think about your water. Think about your food stocks. Think about your emergency communications plans. Think about, do you have people in your house that need medicines that are refrigerated?
Even though U.S. experts know the next war will begin in cyberspace and are scrambling to beef up America's defenses, they also know that in this very internet-connected age, there are likely too many vulnerabilities to defend.
Dale Hurd is here with more. Dale, in that report, you mentioned the vulnerability of water supplies, but what about food supplies, shipping, and transportation to get food out to stores and restaurants? How vulnerable is the food chain?
There is the suspicion that they will target our logistics system and that the whole distribution system will break down. But look, just remember COVID. There aren't enough store shelves in this country, grocery store shelves, for all the people. If they all panic at once and hit the grocery store, the stores will be cleaned out. But the two sides to this story are bad and chaos, all right? So we don't know what our enemies can do, but people need to prepare for the worst.
Well, you mentioned vulnerabilities of the electrical power grid and the potential of nuclear plant malfunctions. Are nuclear plants that vulnerable? I didn't know they were connected to the internet where hackers could actually find their way into the systems.
And again, you know, the wild card in this discussion is we don't know what China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, what they know and what they can do and what they have already tested. It may be that we're able to shut down our nuclear plants in time before anything bad happens, or our dams. Think about all the many things in manufacturing, in our daily lives, that they could get into and cause to malfunction with malicious code.
You mentioned that people need to be prepared to sustain their families for 30 days. What about governments? Here in the United States, our leaders talk a good game, but they seem always surprised when cyber attacks actually happen. Are they taking action? Is it enough?
They are, but they admitted to me, the experts that are working to secure the grid, that it's probably not going to be enough. They're trying to guess. They're trying to find vulnerabilities. They're not sure what our enemies will target. People need to plan for the worst. You and your family, you should be fine for 30 days. Remember that cash machines may not work. Gas stations may not work. If you live in the South, imagine life after a really bad hurricane. Only worse, because they may take down the 911 system. They may cause a disinformation campaign, which I didn't get into. They may try to confuse people and create even more chaos. Gary, it could be really bad. And again, we just don't know.
Okay, Dale Hurd, another excellent report. Thank you for providing some additional insights, Dale. We appreciate it.
Happy to.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has admitted that officials from the Biden administration had pressured his company to remove COVID-19 related content from Facebook and Instagram. In a letter to members of the House Judiciary Committee, Zuckerberg expressed regret for not being more outspoken about government pressures on Meta in 2021. Well, joining us with more on this and other free speech issues is legal scholar and George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Professor Turley's latest book is The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. Professor Turley, so was this political pressure against Meta illegal? What do you think?
I believe it is unconstitutional. I talk about Facebook in the book, in the book, The Indispensable Right, because it plays a critical role in what is an unprecedented alliance we have in this anti-free speech movement today of the government, corporations, the media, and academia, but Facebook was the big dog on the block. And for years, Zuckerberg and Facebook and Meta opposed efforts to release files on censorship. So Elon Musk has been attacked unrelentingly after he released the Twitter files that showed this massive censorship system. But Facebook fought it. And what people need to understand is Zuckerberg's admission came only after the House Judiciary Committee forced him to release those documents. So for many of us who are critics, as I was in this book, it's less inspiring as it is insulting to see him saying he's so really, really sorry about censoring people.
Well, Facebook recently blocked the boosting of posts promoting the new Dennis Quaid movie about Ronald Reagan. Facebook said a handful of Reagan movie ads were incorrectly rejected. Then afterwards, clips were again rejected. So one of these ads featured President Reagan saying the country's best days are still ahead. So do you think this would have happened if a clip of Bill Clinton or Barack Obama making a similar remark was posted? What do you think?
I don't. And, what I talk about in the book is that Facebook actually launched a commercial campaign to try to get American citizens to embrace censorship, which they like to call content moderation. And it was a really creepy campaign. It was an effort to appeal to younger people. And that was telling because, as the book talks about, we're creating a generation of speech phobics. These kids have been told their entire lives that free speech is harmful and it's triggering and you don't have to hear opposing views.
How did we get to this point? I'm sure you're discouraged by this.
Well, I am. The book was an effort to try to understand why we're still struggling with free speech in this country. It looks at the personalities and the periods that have shaped our view of free speech. We all seem to agree that free speech is indispensable, but not why. And what I detail in the book is that at the beginning of our republic, we had a moment of clarity. The most revolutionary part of the American Revolution was the First Amendment. No one had ever published a statement like the First Amendment as the foundation of a government, that the government simply could not abridge free speech. That was revolutionary. It's still revolutionary. There's a movement to amend the First Amendment. It's being led by one of my colleagues who says the First Amendment is, quote, aggressively individualistic and that free speech should be balanced against equity. So even today, it's revolutionary. But as the book talks about, we lost that brief moment of clarity. Within a few years, the courts returned to what I call a Blackstonian or British view of free speech, that we protect it to the extent that it's good for democracy. But it's good for democracy. That's not really in debate, but it's more than that. Because what this book argues is that free speech is a natural right. That was how the framers viewed it when they wrote the First Amendment. They believed that free speech was a gift from God, that it belonged to you as a human being. It wasn't granted to you by the government. It's not tolerated by the government. The government has to protect it because it defines you as a human being.
Well, you have a chapter in the book about Holmes and Schenck shouting fire in a crowded theater. So what speech should be limited and who decides what should be censored?
Well, my hair catches on fire every time someone quotes that line. I testified in the House on censorship, and the Democratic members had changed their position. In my prior testimony, they said there's no proof of any coordination by the government. Then Elon Musk released the Twitter files, and then they said, well, we have to censor. We have to silence these voices. And one of them, Representative Goldberg, quoted that line and said, this is just people screaming fire in a crowded theater. And I said, Representative Goldman, you are familiar, aren't you, that line from Schenck was used to incarcerate a socialist who was opposing the war by passing around a flyer quoting the United States Constitution. Is that the line? Is that the case that you want to use as the standard? Because Holmes himself walked away from that, and the court walked away from Schenck. And the response of Representative Goldman was, we don't need a law lecture here, Professor. And I said, yes, I think you do. Right? I think that the problem with free speech is that every generation has to defend it. And this generation has never been more divided, as you noted, because they have been told that free speech is going to hurt them. You see, it's very hard to get a free people to give up freedom. They have to be really afraid or really angry. And that's what we're seeing. You know, the Washington Post just ran a column saying the First Amendment's out of control and is threatening your very jobs. It's an effort to make you so afraid that you're willing to make yourself less free.
Up next, more with Jonathan Turley, combating disinformation by rating news organizations. Who does the rating? And social media censorship and the upcoming presidential election. More now on free speech rights and censorship with legal scholar Jonathan Turley, author of the book, The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. In addition to Mark Zuckerberg's admission about government pressure against Meta, 2 years ago, a poll found nearly 80% of Americans believe media censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story changed the outcome of the 2020 election. So what have you learned? Was the government involved in election interference there?
Oh, I think that it was. I mean, when you suppress a story like that, it is having an election effect. It was a very close election, as we all know. I wrote columns after the New York Post ran that story and said, look, this is self-verifying. This appears to be true because we know the people on the other end of these emails and messages. They have confirmed that they received these text and messages. And the effort was to suppress it. And so you had Twitter, and now Facebook admits that they also suppressed the story under pressure from the government. But the problem here is that the anti-free speech movement today is being pushed in large part by the media. And they're just not reporting as much as they should on these stories because they were part of it. You know, years ago, I wrote a column that talked about how Houdini in New York used to make his elephant disappear every night on the stage, his elephant Jenny. People were thrilled. The interesting thing is that the key to the trick is that Houdini knew the audience wanted the elephant to disappear. It never left the stage. He made the audience part of the trick. That's what is so amazing about this Hunter Biden story and the anti-free speech movement. They made the media part of the trick, and so they're invested in it.
Well, you're talking about the media. What do you think of NewsGuard? They say they have a team of trained journalists monitoring the news. Is it a reliable monitor of media disinformation, or is it skewed against conservative viewpoints?
Well, I had a rather sharp exchange with NewsGuard recently. I wrote a column saying that these systems of ranking sites and looking at revenue sources is threatening to free speech, and that NewsGuard is making a great deal of money at this. But what it does is essentially can chill advertisers from supporting sites. And we've seen these ranking systems before, and when we write about them, they're often shut down, and then another one pops up. NewsGuard's the biggest. Within a week of my writing that column, I heard from NewsGuard saying, we want to know where the money for your blog comes from, and we want to know why you don't say you're conservative and essentially tell people up front that you're giving conservative views. And I wrote a column about that too. And that led to this exchange with one of the founders of NewsGuard. Now, I'm not familiar with all of that NewsGuard does, but I oppose these ranking systems and these systems that are used by advertisers. They are dangerous for free speech. We have seen them weaponized. Recently, another ranking system that was supported by the United States government ranked the 10 most dangerous sites for advertisers. All 10 were conservative or libertarian. They included the New York Post. And then the sites that they said were most reliable included things like the Huffington Post. So that's the bias that you get when you allow these ranking systems to go forward.
Well, what do you see happening this election year then? Do you expect more election interference, disinformation, social media censorship, or less?
Well, disinformation is very much part of the effort to censor, and it's ramping up as we speak. Free speech is on the ballot. I don't think democracy is, but free speech is. And we have a choice to make here because Kamala Harris is in full-throated support of the censorship efforts by the Biden administration.
So what must we do then to protect free speech, especially in an age of rage?
Well, first of all, we have to have a type of awakening. We have to remind ourselves of why this right is indispensable. But you know what? People often ask, are you just pessimistic about the trends? And I'm not, because there is an interesting element to believing that free speech is a natural right. Because if free speech was given to us by God, if it is part of being human, if it's in our DNA, then you can never really kill it without killing us.
Okay, the book is The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. Professor Jonathan Turley, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
This week, White House pressure increased on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to reach a Gaza ceasefire agreement with Hamas. President Biden said Netanyahu isn't doing enough to reach a deal. That angered the Israeli Prime Minister, who said, quote, "They murdered 6 of our hostages in cold blood. So after this horrible murder, I don't believe that someone serious would come and say, now make more concessions." Folks, almost everyone wants the 101 hostages returned, but at what price? Netanyahu must also consider the future security of 10 million Israelis. Give terrorists an inch and they'll take a mile. Make concessions and Hamas will be back demanding more and plotting to implement future October 7th massacres. Netanyahu insists, just like the defeat of the Nazis in World War II Germany, the fight must end only in total victory. Hamas must be defeated, and its ability to govern and fight must be destroyed. October 7th was the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. Netanyahu is determined we must be as well. Never again must mean never again. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.